In June of 1991, one of my favorite titles for the Sega Genesis was released. Batman was based on the 1989 Tim Burton film featuring Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson in the leading roles. The Genesis version took a bit of extra time to see release in the United States because of Sunsoft's contracts with Nintendo, but I sure was glad when it finally did. While fairly straightforward in regards to design, it played so well and really nailed the look and feel of the film. So powerful was the soundtrack that I use it in pretty much every episode of my show here on YouTube. When you see the credits roll, that's Batman from the Genesis belting out that awesome FM synth. When it was clear in 1992 the Genesis was getting another Batman game based on the second film by Tim Burton, I was stoked, ready for more fantastic action platforming. And the initial magazine reviews were promising. Places like GamePro really spoke well of it, so much so I really thought I was getting a sequel of similar or better quality than the first. But what you are about to see is a review for a game that fell well short of my expectations. An early lesson that game reviews are subjective opinion and should never be taken as anything more. In this episode, we are going to take a look at Batman Returns for the Sega Genesis and find out why it's one of the most disappointing releases for me on the platform. Batman Returns started life missing the release of the film by quite a bit. It made its way out in theaters in June of 1992, but the game didn't see a retail showing until October that year. Better late than never, I suppose. It was developed by Malibu Interactive under license from Sega themselves. Malibu had been known as Acme Interactive, developer of Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing, so the IP appeared to be in good hands. The story follows the film pretty much to a T. The evil Penguin is setting his sights on Gotham City, so he frames Batman for murder in his bid to become mayor. As Batman, you must defeat the Penguin and his Red Triangle Gang, a bizarre cadre of circus performers running amok in the city. Batman isn't defenseless, however. Inside his utility belt, you'll find Batarangs, smoke bombs, bat swarms, grappling hooks, heat-seeking Batarangs, and a grappling gun. Each item has an effective use, but you must expend each one wisely. There is a small amount of ammunition available and you can only procure more in the field. Their use is pretty much what you'd expect. Batarangs are distance weapons, smoke bombs stun enemies, bat swarms stun and do massive damage, super seeking Batarangs hone in on enemies automatically, and the grappling gun hits enemies low on the ground. The grappling hook is for getting around the play area. You can use it to swing and to get to higher ground. In addition to your utility belt items, there are also life replenishment hearts scattered around the stages, and of course extra lives. Batman also has close quarters combat, punches and kicks that can be used anytime to help you deal with the enemies and bosses. The majority of your combat will be composed of these attacks. The stage layouts are pretty much of the hardcore platforming variety. There are plenty of areas to fall to your death, though Batman does have a limited flight power to help you slow your descent if you aren't sure where you can or cannot go. This is governed by a meter, and yes, you can run out of it. Of course, there is a boss or two that waits for you at the midpoint and at the end of most stages, typically a character or set piece from the film. These fights range from incredibly easy to brutally difficult, making your lives a valuable commodity. You do get a set of limited continues, but they start you back at the very beginning of the stage, no matter how far you made it beforehand. Graphically, Batman Returns is a very bland and colorless presentation. This is supposed to be Gotham at night, so you expect it to have some darker tones. but here the visuals are just dreary and lacking character at all. Some areas feel like they are literally 3 colors on the screen, repeated over and over to give you a game world that fails to do the art from the film any real justice. Even Batman himself is locked to a few shades of purple that easily get him lost against the backgrounds. The stages that do see things like multiple layers often put them either in the foreground where they block the action, or in areas where they're covered up. A cloud layer or some line scrolling would have done wonders for the setting. Things change up a bit in the late game, but overall this is just not an impressive showing on hardware that produced a game 2 years prior that is vastly superior in color and variety. There are just far too many instances where things remain shockingly simple. You will play entire stages that make 8-bit Master System games look stunning in comparison. The disappointment also seeps into the animation. Batman walks funny, most enemies repeat the same few frames over and over, and the backgrounds have almost nothing going of interest. In fact, this one is missing any real animation at all in the city around you. It's utterly lifeless, almost as if the entire thing is playing out on a low-budget stage at your local playhouse. You could level some of the same sentiments at the original Sunsoft effort, but at least that one has the excuse at being only 4 megabits in size. Batman Returns is a full 8 megabits, the same space seen in the likes of Strider and Shinobi 3. And let me assure you, my friends, Shinobi 3 this is not when it comes to visuals. As I mentioned before, Batman on the Genesis had one of the most impressive soundtracks that hardware ever produced. I mean, it's god tier among the content created for FM chips. Batman Returns, on the other hand, is a gems-driven letdown. And I mean it's so far off of the Sunsoft produced tunes, it sounds like it's coming from a completely different machine. The compositions are so forgettable and so weak in tone and presence, you could cut the music off entirely and it wouldn't bother you a lick. It's not the worst gem soundtrack on the Genesis, but as a sequel to the awesome Batman, I was expecting so much more. The real issue with Batman Returns doesn't really manifest itself until you spend a little time with its gameplay. There's nothing complicated here, and even the difficulty can be easily handled with a little trial and error. Each stage is basically set up no different than most of the other action platformers you've played on the Genesis. Enemies are placed around the stage to stop you, and you need to learn where they are and the best way to deal with them. That's it. But where this one fails mainly is in the interaction with those enemies. Hit detection is an absolute joke. You can be hit an inch outside of your sprite by some attacks. The enemy placement is also cheap as hell. Usually these guys are just off screen above or below you, waiting in the perfect spot to get in a few hits before you can react. This forces you to play tag with the bad guys by waiting for their vulnerable frames. I suppose this would be okay if this were something else, but this is Batman for God's sake, and running from standard enemies the entire game so you can hit them when they stop flying, jumping, and flipping grows old really fast. Any melee aggression you show typically results in damage you regret, especially when you first start playing. This extends to many of the boss encounters as well. A number of these battles are dictated by invincible animation frames that either has Batman running away looking for openings, or just saying screw it and pounding that attack button, throwing all strategy out the window. Again, this might have been okay if the hit detection wasn't so awful, but you're gonna eat a ton of damage and or deaths figuring it out. The great equalizer, of course, are your weapons. They do indeed make things easier, and you do well to explore every nook and cranny to keep your ammunition as high as possible. In fact, keep that ammunition high, and this game can actually be a breeze, because there is a ton of life replenishment in each area. This isn't a long game either. There are 5 main stages, with each one having a few short areas within. I was able to beat it for this capture just using a single continue, and I haven't played the thing seriously since 1992. The main question is, can you deal with the poor hit detection long enough to get good at it? That answer is going to vary person to person and divide up many of you between 2 camps. Some will deal with it and feel rewarded for the journey. Others will quickly grow tired of the design and relegate this one to the back burner, never touching it again. I have to confess that I'm harder on Batman Returns than perhaps is fair. My enjoyment of the first one no doubt drives my intense dislike for this one. How did we go from the simple yet fun original to the reality of this? This just is not the game it should have been. It could have looked better. It could have sounded better. The gameplay could have been more interesting. This is even missing the vehicle-based stages from the first. A few driving areas could have really added some much needed variety and gotten us away from the things the game doesn't do so well. To their credit, I believe Malibu Interactive realized this themselves, which is why we received Batman Returns on the Sega CD. That added a number of extra stages with the various vehicles from the film, not to mention a radically improved soundtrack that replaced the weak Gems crap we heard from the cartridge. I do recommend you play the Sega CD version if you want to give this a try. That extra content makes all the difference in the world and can make this far more tolerable than the cartridge alone. Perhaps the saddest reality is that Konami handled the license on the Super Nintendo, releasing a beat-em-up that I preferred so much more. I was usually happy when Sega handled its own games, but this is one instance where I really wish they had stayed away and let Konami bring over a remixed version of what we saw on the Super Nintendo. If it had turned out anything like Hyperstone Heist, the Christmas of 1992 would have been a whole lot merrier. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.